Welcome. It's great to see you all here at the library for a wonderful program of the history of Leesburg. Yay, I'm excited to welcome you and to welcome our speaker, Betsy Arnett, for a regular program we do with a brief history of the town of Leesburg. I will say it has recently been one of our most popular programs because people are interested to learn more about Leesburg, which is great.
Seats up here.
There are plenty of seats.
Whole row.
So my name is Laura Christensen. I'm the library director here at Thomas Welsh Library. I hope for many of you, this is a return visit to the library, but if it is not, and it's the first visit, I would encourage you after the program to pop upstairs. Our reading room will be open after 10, so after the program's over, and you're welcome to explore. We have lots of great exhibits going on. We have lots of programs coming up. And of course, we have tons of information about all of the things that you're gonna learn about today. So if this sparks a lot of questions and you wanna learn more, come see us upstairs and we're happy to help you. We also have a children's library collection now. So for young readers, there's some things up there to find. And all of the archives are available here on site today. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, who is a former colleague of ours, and now a colleague in history. Betsy Arnett recently retired after a 25-year career.
Yeah, 22 years.
22 years? Did it seem longer?
It's long. Much longer.
With the town of Leesburg. She is a public historian with a degree from the University of South Carolina in public history. At Town of Leesburg, she filled a number of roles from senior project manager to the public information officer, but she also worked on numerous projects related to the history of the area. And when I first started working here, 15 years ago or so, Betsy was a go-to person for the history of the area. So I look forward to her sharing her knowledge with you, and then helping you explore further. So,
thank you. Thank you, Laura, for that kind introduction. Yes, so I was with the town for 22 years. Just a brief explanation of how this presentation came about. So as the public information officer, one of my roles was when we did new employee orientation, I would do a presentation about the demographics and the recent growth of the town, and someone else did a history of Leesburg, and this person had been doing it for years and years and years and years, long before I came around. And 1 week before a new employee orientation, this person was not going to be able to be there, and HR called me and said, "Hey, Betsy," because I'd worked on the walking tours, which I'll talk about at the end of this presentation, and other things related to the history. "Hey, can you, so-and-so's not going to be here, can you do the presentation?" And I said, "Sure." Send me the PowerPoint. And she sent the PowerPoint, and it was all pictures, no text. And so the then director of the library and I, Alexandra, we kind of muddled our way through it, but clearly this person was just speaking extemporaneously and using the pictures as prompts. And so we kind of muddled our way through it, but we decided that we needed to have a presentation that someone else could pick up and go through without too much difficulty. So that's how this came about. And this is, I think, the 3rd year that I've done this presentation here at the Bulge. And every time I learn something, every time someone offers some information that I wasn't aware of, every time somebody asks a question that I then go research and I learn something new. So please, if you have questions, if you have information you'd like to share, just raise your hand. I'd love for this to be a more interactive presentation as much as we can make it. So the history of Leesburg. So obviously the inhabitants of this area were native peoples, mostly of the members of the Algonquian and Siouan nations. There is a north-south trade route that runs through this area known as the Carolina Road. And so there was a lot of movement among native peoples through this area. The first record, though, the first written record of an encounter between whites and native peoples took place in 1699. So two plantation owners from what is now Stafford County Burr Harrison and Giles Vandercastle came up to this area at the request of the colonial governor to investigate the possibility of a treaty. And Mr. Harrison recorded in his diary an encounter, a meeting that they had with members of the Piscataway tribe of the Siouan Nation. So this was the first written record of whites encountering natives in this area. This is a modern painting by William Woodward, in which Mr. Woodward imagines what this encounter between Harrison and Vandercastle and members of the Piscataway tribe looked like. The Piscataway were originally from Maryland. They had been pushed south into this area by white settlement in the colony of Maryland. Now, after 1699, clearly more and more whites moved into this area, culminating in 1722, in the Great Treaty of 1722. So Virginia Governor Alexander Spotswood signed this treaty along with the governors of New York and Pennsylvania. It's also known as the Albany Treaty of 1722 because it was signed in Albany, New York. And in this treaty, the Five Nations of the Iroquois relinquished their claims to the lands east of the Blue Ridge. Of course, by this point, the Iroquois' numbers had been greatly decimated by smallpox. So there weren't a lot of them left in this area. But the Treaty of 1722 actually set up a later dispute over land in this area, which I'll get to in a minute. So you've probably heard that about the Northern Neck Proprietary, that this land, this area of Leesburg around Leesburg was part of the Northern Neck Proprietary. It's also known as the Fairfax Grant. It was a land grant from the King of England. And so in 1649, Charles made a grant of a tract of land known as the Northern Neck Proprietary to a group of English noblemen to garner their support for his effort to regain the throne. Because, of course, in 1649, Charles was not King of England. He was in exile on the continent. His father, Charles I, having been beheaded, right? He was in exile, but he wanted to regain the throne. And so he was trying to get the support of these English noblemen by giving them land here in Virginia. Now, the point of getting a land grant from the king wasn't like, oh, here's a piece of property, go build a house. No, it was a source of income. It was a means of building wealth. You have a land grant from the king, then you have, you can extract resources from that land, timber, fur, minerals. You can establish plantations and grow crops like tobacco that would, be sold and get you money. You could lease the land, get a recurring source of income. So it was a means of building wealth. So the grant the proprietary was originally described as all of the land between the heads and the waters of the Potomac and Rappahannock rivers. Now today, when people talk about the Northern Neck, what they're referring to is just that peninsula of land between the Potomac and Rappahannock rivers up to about the city of Fredericksburg, right? So if you look at a map of Virginia, there are three peninsulas that form the western coastline of the Chesapeake Bay, right? The Northern Neck, the Middle Peninsula, and it's either called the Lower Peninsula or the Southern Neck, right? So the Northern Neck today is just that peninsula, but in the original grant, it was described as being between the head springs. So how far away are the head springs, the headwaters of the Potomac and Rappahannock rivers? It extended well into what is today West Virginia. So in 1660, Charles was indeed restored to the throne. He became King Charles II. The grant was legally recognized. Lord Thomas Culpeper was the son of one of the original grantees. So there were 6 shares of the grant. Thomas's father had been one of the original grantees. His brother had been another. So Thomas inherited his father's share. A cousin inherited his uncle's share. So the Culpepers owned a third of the Northern Neck Proprietary. And then Thomas acquired the other 4 shares, so that the Culpepers owned the entire Northern Neck Proprietary. And then in 1719, Thomas's grandson, Thomas Fairfax, there are a lot of Thomases in this. Thomas Fairfax, the 6th Lord Fairfax of Cameron, inherited all 6 shares. So Thomas Culpepper had one legitimate heir, and that was his daughter Margaret, who had married Thomas Fairfax, the 5th Lord Fairfax of Cameron. And so when Thomas Culpepper died, he bequeathed his 5 shares directly to his grandson. He bypassed his daughter. He was actually bypassing his son-in-law, who was not good with money, shall we say, pretty much bankrupt the family. And so then in 1719, when Margaret died, her son inherited her share. She had inherited the last share, that 6th share, from a cousin, from a Culpepper cousin. And so then her son, Thomas Fairfax, the 6th Lord Fairfax of Cameron, now owned all 6 shares. He was also at this point 25 years old, and so of legal age, and was able to then control the property himself. So remember I said that the Treaty of 1722 set up a legal battle. So the colony of Virginia in the early 1730s contested both Lord Fairfax's ownership of, as well as the southern and western boundaries of the proprietary. Fairfax actually, because they claimed that the land, there was an overlap between what they claimed that the Five Nation of the Iroquois had given them in the Treaty of 1722, and what Fairfax claimed to be part of the Northern Neck Proprietary. So Fairfax actually came to Virginia and spent a couple of years here and set in motion the process of surveying that southern boundary. The northern boundary, of course, is the Potomac River, and the other side of the Potomac River is the colony of Maryland. So there's no contest about that. But he set in motion the process of surveying that southern boundary. He returned to England, and in 1747, so it took more than 10 years, in 1747, the Privy Council of London found in Lord Fairfax's favor, big surprise, we're going to side with the king. That he indeed owned it and what its boundaries were. And the recognized boundaries included 5.2 million acres of land. And this is a map of the Northern Neck Proprietary laid over modern counties in Virginia and West Virginia. And so you see the northern boundary is the Potomac River. What had been in dispute was the southern boundary, right? What is the headwater of the Rappahannock River? And so what they determined the boundary was the Rappahannock River to its confluence with the Rapidan River, to its confluence with the Conway River, to its head spring, which is somewhere near the boundary between Page and Madison counties. And then to determine the southwestern boundary, they basically drew a line between the headwaters of the North Branch of the Potomac River to the headwaters of the Conway River. And this is known as the Fairfax Line. And it is still in existence today in places. You can see it still forms the boundary between Shenandoah and Rockingham counties in Virginia. And so this was the Northern Neck Proprietary, later known as the Fairfax Grant, because later kings did reaffirm that grant to Fairfax. And so, of course, Leesburg is in Loudoun County. So from the beginning, as I mentioned, both the Culpeppers and the Fairfaxes saw the Northern Neck as a source of income, right? They established their own plantations, they grew crops, leased out the land, they sold off parcels of land. Fairfax actually inherited his father's debts and ended up selling off all of the Fairfax family homes. The one home that he kept was Leeds Castle, which was the Culpepper family home. But he also sold off parcels of the other Northern Neck Proprietary, and he sold off about 4,000 acres of what is now Leesburg. Now, for comparison, today, the town boundaries of Leesburg encompass about 9,000 acres, so a little less than half was what he sold off. It changed hands a number of times, but the owners continued to lease the land. So it wasn't that there was one owner who established a plantation here. They leased out the land, they leased out different parcels. And by the 1750s, a settlement had grown up around the intersection, the crossroads of two very important trade routes. I already mentioned the North-South Carolina route, but also then the East-West Potomac Ridge Road. And of course, these roads still exist today. I drove in on the Potomac Ridge Road this morning. Of course, it's Route 7 today, and the Carolina Road is Route 15. So, by 1757, enough whites had settled in this area that the House of Burgesses realized that they needed a courthouse out here, right? This was part of Fairfax County, and people were having to travel all the way to Fairfax to do legal business. And so they subdivided, partitioned off Loudoun County from the western portion of Fairfax County in 1757. So Loudoun County is named for John Campbell, the 5th Earl of Loudoun. He was a Scottish nobleman and an army officer. He served as commander-in-chief of the British forces during the French and Indian Wars and as governor general of Virginia. He was, however, not particularly popular with the colonial leaders. So a man named Nicholas Minor, who was a tavern owner in that crossroads settlement, purchased 326 acres of land from John Carlisle, who was at this point the owner of that 4,000 acres that Fairfax had sold off. And he hired a man named John Huff, a surveyor, to divide 60 acres of that into 70 lots. And this is a plan of that original plat of the town of Leesburg. And so he named his new town Georgetown in honor of King George II, then the reigning monarch of England. And he offered it up as a site for the new county seat. In 1758, the town was chartered by the Virginia House of Burgesses and selected as the location for the new Loudoun County Courthouse, but they renamed the town Leesburg in honor of the Lee family. Thomas Lee, who was the patriarch of the Lee family, had died in 1750, so it was probably in honor of him. But his two sons, or two of his sons, Richard Henry Lee and Francis Lightfoot Lee, were named as trustees of the new town, along with Nicholas Minor. Richard Henry Lee and Francis Lightfoot Lee enjoy another distinction in American history. Anyone know what that is? They are the only brothers to have signed the Declaration of Independence. Yes. So this is a larger, it's a blow up of that plan of Leesburg. So just a few things to point out. So Cornwall, Market, Loudoun, Royal, and King Street all have the same names that they did back then. Back Street, of course, is now Wirt Street. You can see here is the courthouse. And then, you can see some of the names have been added as people purchased the lots. John Patterson, the Patterson House still exists on Loudoun Street. Stephen Donaldson, the Donaldson Cabin, Silversmith Cabin, still on Loudoun Street as well. So when Nicholas Minor began selling off lots in the new town of Leesburg, he included covenants in the deeds that required the new property owners to build a brick, stone, or wood house at least 20 feet by 16 feet and 9 feet high within 3 years of the purchase. And if they didn't do that, the property would revert to Minor. And the reason for this is there are early accounts of this crossroads settlement describe it as being indifferently built, which we take to mean it was a little slapdash, a little ramshackle. And Nicholas Minor wanted his town to be substantial, to be a respectable, proper town. So the idea of controlling the aesthetics of the town goes back way before the establishment of the old Historic District. So there are several of these covenant houses still in existence today that in their close to what is their original appearance. The one at the top, these are both on Loudoun Street Southwest. This is the old stone house. And then the bottom picture, of course, is the Donaldson cabin. So the Donaldson cabin was almost demolished in the 1980s when the town hall parking garage was built. It was a dry cleaners. and it was covered in asbestos siding. And when they removed the siding in preparation for demolition, they realized how old it was. And a campaign was started to save the cabin. So this cabin today, it has been moved on its original site. It's still on the same lot, but it's not exactly where it was on the site. And this is really mostly from about shoulder height up. Well, maybe not my shoulder height, but from about here up. It's a reconstruction. That everything, the roof and all of that is not original. And it's also important to note that when it was originally built, it never would have had the chinking between the logs exposed to the elements, because you would have just been constantly rechinking. So it would have had siding on it. So this is really more of a depiction of what people in the 1980s thought colonial era buildings looked like. So there are other covenant buildings, covenant houses still existing, but they've been added onto to the point that you really can't tell what they are. But the Birkby House, which is at the corner of Liberty and Loudon, if you go look at the Birkby House from Liberty Street, and if you're standing facing it on the right-hand side, you'll see there's a smaller section. That's the original section of that house. And we believe it to have been a covenant house. So during the Revolutionary and, particularly during the colonial era, the Church of England was the official state church, and they collected tithes or taxes, 10%, from all citizens, regardless of whether they were members of the church or not. Most people did not object to this because they knew that the money was going to support the poor, the indigent, widows and orphans, et cetera. But any other denomination that wanted to operate, wanted to hold services, wanted to own property, build churches in the colony, had to get permission. They were called dissenters, and they had to get permission from the crown through the colonial governor to do so. And Leesburg, in fact, had a substantial number of dissenters. So, and Leesburg and Loudoun County, Quakers, Methodists, Lutherans, Baptists, Presbyterians were all represented here. Let me go back. This is the Old Stone Church. This is a photograph. So in 1766, Nicholas Minor sold a lot in Leesburg to Robert Hamilton, who was a trustee of the Methodist Church. And the deed read, "For no other use but for a church or meeting house and graveyard." And so this sale makes Leesburg home to the earliest known property in the United States owned by the Methodist Church. This is the church that was built there. This no longer exists. It was torn down around 1900, but the cemetery still exists. It is located on Liberty Street between North and Cornwall, and the foundation of this church is still there, is still visible. You can see it, and that site is considered a shrine by the United Methodist Church. They still own it. So in 1744, by this time, Leesburg had grown to about 500 people. I'm not sure what the population of the county was, but a group of Loudoun property owners met at the Loudoun County Courthouse, and they adopted what was known as the Loudoun County Resolves, which was a statement regarding taxation issues. It was a precursor to the Declaration of Independence, and a lot of these resolves were adopted by counties around throughout the colonies, and copies were then sent to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia and sent to London. But the Loudoun also sent a delegation to the Virginia meeting on the issue of taxation. During the Revolutionary War, every free man in Loudoun between 16 and 50 was enrolled in the county militia. By the end of the war, Loudoun had the largest militia in Virginia at 1,746 men. So following the Revolutionary War, some things that occurred here in Leesburg. The Leesburg Volunteer Fire Company was founded in 1803. And of course, they still exist today. In 1811, a new courthouse was constructed. A brick courthouse was constructed, replacing the original one that had been built in 1761. So this is the second courthouse. The third courthouse is the one that exists today. In February of 1813, the town of Leesburg was incorporated by the Virginia General Assembly. And this new government consisted of a mayor, a recorder, and a council. So this incorporation gave the town the ability to elect its own officials, enact its own ordinances. Prior to that, it was governed by a board of trustees. Remember, I mentioned that the Lee brothers and Minor had been named to the first board of trustees. During the War of 1812, in August 1814, the British invaded Washington and set fire to a number of buildings, including the presidential mansion, was not known as the White House at that time, and the Capitol building. Prior to their invasion, some foresighted folks loaded the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and other important documents from the federal archives, loaded them onto wagons, and brought them out to Leesburg, where they were stored in an empty house on Wirt Street for about 2 weeks. Now, there is an alternate story that claims that the papers were stored in the vault at Rokeby House, which is located 3 miles south. At that point, it was 3 miles south of Leesburg, so 3 miles south of the intersection of Loudon and Market. But the clerk who was responsible for the removal of the papers from Washington, a man named Stephen Pleasanton, wrote later that, quote, he proceeded with them to the town of Leesburg, a distance of 35 miles, at which place an empty house was procured, in which the papers were safely placed, the doors locked, and the keys given to the Reverend Mr. Littlejohn. The Reverend Mr. Littlejohn was the pastor at the Methodist Church, and Mr. Littlejohn lived in the parsonage located next door to the church, a house that still exists today at the corner of Wirt and Cornwall Street. Mr. Pleasanton also recalled that he had to travel back and forth to Leesburg several times while the papers were being held here to consult them for various official reasons. So the eminent historian Eugene Shield concludes that the papers were indeed held in a house on Wirt Street, an empty house on Wirt Street, not at Rokeby. We don't really have any evidence one way or the other, but it is our story and we're going to stick to it. So it is. So early growth of the town. The town limits were expanded to include an additional 105 acres in 1814. The town organized a lottery to pave the streets in 1817. In 1820, the Leesburg Turnpike opened, connecting DC and connecting Leesburg with DC and the Little River Turnpike system. And 10 years later, the turnpike was extended westward into the Shenandoah Valley. In 1821, the first municipal water system was installed. So wooden pipes were installed to carry water from a spring west of town. Of course, it's not west of town. It's pretty much in downtown now, Rock Spring Farm. But in 2008, a section of this wooden pipe was discovered on that property, and it's now on display at the Utilities Department. And the town has recently acquired this property as a park, the Rock Spring Farm. It's at the intersection of Loudon and Dry Mill Road. So one of the biggest events to ever take place in the town of Leesburg occurred during the farewell tour of the Marquis de Lafayette. And of course, we just celebrated the 200th anniversary of this tour. So from August of 1824 to September of 1825, the Marquis de Lafayette, the last surviving French general of the Revolution, one of the heroes of the Siege of Yorktown, made a farewell tour of the United States. And this was done at the invitation of then President James Monroe. Lafayette visited all 24 states, and he was here for the 1824 presidential election, in which John Quincy Adams was elected. And then he was here in March of 1825 for Adams' inauguration. Before he left, in August of 1825, he visited then former James Monroe at his home, Oak Hill, just south of Leesburg. And this property is now going to be a state park. So that was just approved by the General Assembly this year. But a banquet was held here in Leesburg in Lafayette's honor, and an estimated 8,000 people attended the celebrations on the Loudoun County Courthouse lawn to fete the Marquis de Lafayette. By the 1850 census, Leesburg had about 1,700 residents. And Leesburg's population stayed about 1,700 from 1850 to 19. There was a dip after the Civil War, but for the most part, from 1850 to 1750, the town of Leesburg was about 1,700 residents. So this is the 1853 Yardley Taylor map. So some of the things to point out on this map. You can see the Presbyterian Church here. Here's the Methodist Meeting House. By this point, the Methodist Church had split into two factions, pro-slavery, anti-slavery. So the pro-slavery church, this is the ME Church South here, and that is where the United Methodist Church is today. So the Episcopal Church is over here. The G.W. Ball residence, George Washington Ball, nephew of George Washington, that is the Donna Manor, which we'll talk about later. So in the 1860 presidential election, the Constitutional Union candidate, John Bell, garnered about 60% of the votes in Loudoun County. The 1860 presidential election was essentially two separate elections, one in the North, one in the South. In the North, the contest was between the Republican candidate, Abraham Lincoln, and the Democratic Party candidate, Stephen Douglas. In the South, the contest was between the Constitutional Union candidate, John Bell, and the Southern Democratic Party candidate, John Breckinridge. The Republican slate wasn't even on the ballot in the 10 slave states at that time. But the Constitutional Union Party was against secession. And they carried 3 of the 10 slave states at that time: Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky. So all upper South, not the deep South. But my point in saying this is there was clearly a lot of anti-secession sentiment here in Loudoun County prior to the Civil War. And in April 1861, in fact, Loudoun's 2 delegates to the Virginia Secession Convention, John Janney and John Armistead Carter, both voted against secession. The Ordinance of Secession, however, was adopted by the convention, and a month later, Leesburg men, and I say Leesburg men because, of course, they were the only ones who could vote, overwhelmingly ratified the ordinance in support of secession. So during the Civil War, many Leesburg men enlisted, mostly in the 8th Virginia Infantry or the 6th Virginia Cavalry. Germans and Quakers in the Lovettsville and Waterford areas formed Loudoun's only Union unit, the Loudoun Rangers. In May of 1861, the town of Leesburg authorized the printing of its own paper currency known as dog money because it had a picture of a dog on it. Anecdotally, we're told that that was the mayor's dog. I don't know if that's true or not. And about $100,000 of this money was issued. Of course, technically, it was not legal tender. But now it's collector's item. So the only battle that took place in the vicinity of Leesburg was the Battle of Ball's Bluff. And it was actually more of a skirmish than a battle. It wasn't a planned battle. It was more of a mistake. So through the fall of 1861, Leesburg had been occupied by Confederate troops under the command of Colonel Nathan Shanks Evans. And on the morning, and at this time, Union troops were encamped on Harrison Island, which is the island in the middle of the Potomac River, right across from Ball's Bluff. So on the morning of October 21st, 1861, based on a faulty intelligence report, so a scout had come over the night before, thought he saw a lightly guarded camp. The Union sent a raiding party across the river from Harris Island to attack this camp that did not exist. What did exist, however, this is a map showing Harrison Island and Ball's Bluff. What did exist was a company of Mississippi infantrymen, and intense fighting ensued. Union Colonel Edward Baker arrived on Harrison Island in the morning and ordered as many troops as were available to cross the river in support of this raiding party. Unfortunately, Baker was not much of a logistics expert because there weren't enough boats to efficiently send people across the river, and a bottleneck ensued. So if you think about from a logistical standpoint, you're trying to ferry men across the river in open boats while the Confederates are holding the high ground of the bluff above the river. It is a recipe for disaster. And so by the afternoon, the Union began to retreat, Confederates holding the high ground of the bluff. And the Confederates fired on the retreating Union soldiers as they were trying to get back across the river. So this was this engagement lasted less than a day. It wasn't planned, but it had huge impacts for the conduct of the war. So first of all, just a recap of what happened. So about 1,720 Union troops crossed the river, and 223 of them died, including 166 who drowned in the river trying to get back across. One of the dead was Edward Baker. Not only was he a Union colonel, he was a sitting US Senator from Oregon. He was originally from Illinois. He was a personal friend of President Abraham Lincoln. He remains the only sitting senator to be killed in battle in the United States. On the Confederate side, they sent about the same number into battle, but suffered only 36 dead. So what were the impacts of this small battle? So first of all, the Union troops who drowned in the river, their bodies floated down the river. And what's downriver from here? The nation's capital. And so these bodies showed up in Washington, prompting outcries about the war. There were also the reports of savagery of the Confederates firing on the retreating soldiers. That was not considered gentlemanly. The death of a sitting senator and a personal friend of the president, as well as this was the third consecutive Union defeat following the first Battle of Bull Run and the Battle of Wilson's Creek in Missouri. And so it led to the establishment of the first Congressional Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War. So it really did have big impacts for such a small skirmish. So that winter, three forts were built. I'm sorry, my animation's not working properly. But three forts were built on the hills surrounding Leesburg, Forts Johnston, Evans, and Beauregard. So Fort Johnston is still west of the town. It's up on the hill above, above Route 7 as you head west. There's nothing left of it. The property is privately owned. Fort Beauregard was obliterated. We don't know exactly where it was located, but it was obliterated when the Beauregard Estates neighborhood was constructed. Fort Evans, though, the foundation of it still exists and is still visible. So here's the plan of it. This is, I don't know how well you can see this. This is an aerial photo. It's a little dark, but here's Fort Evans. So this is the outlet mall. This is the bypass. That's Home Depot, right? So it's owned by Rahal. It's on the Rahal property. And so unfortunately, it's not protected in any way. They could do what they want with it, but so far they have continued to essentially just let it be as it is. But yes, Fort Evans, obviously where the name of the road comes from, does still exist. The foundation still exists. So in March of 1862, the Union, this was the first time that the Union occupied Leesburg. And George Fox, who was clerk of the Loudoun County Court, evacuated the county's records down to Lynchburg, which is why they survived the war. And so Loudoun County is enormously lucky to have all of its records dating all the way back to 1757, which is not something that many, Virginia counties can say that we're in the path of Civil War battles. In September 1862, the Confederate Army took Leesburg back. General Lee took up residence at Harrison Hall on North King Street. This house is now known as the Glenfiddich House. And there he met with Generals Jackson, Stewart, and Longstreet to plan their advance across the Potomac River in what became known as the Antietam Campaign. As a side note here, during the war, a 19-year-old woman named Virginia Miller lived at Harrison Hall, and she kept a diary from November of 1861 to April of 1862. And the library has a copy of that diary, along with copies of other women's diaries from Leesburg and Loudoun County that really do illuminate what life was like on the home front during the Civil War. So if you have a chance, check it out. In June of 1864, I'm sorry, it's not visible. General Jubal Early, Confederate General Jubal Early, and his troops passed right through downtown Leesburg, being chased by Union troops after his aborted attack on Washington, D.C. And by the end of the war, Leesburg had changed hands about 150 times between the Union and the Confederacy. So Reconstruction, after the war, like the rest of Virginia, Leesburg was battered and broke. And when I showed my mother this presentation, she said, "Don't you mean broken?" I said, "No, I mean broke. There was no money." However, Leesburg's industries, generally supported the agrarian economy of Loudoun County. Leesburg was a market town, right? And so our proximity to Washington as a destination for the agricultural goods grown in Loudoun County helped Leesburg's economic recovery. By 1867, rail service to Alexandria, which had been suspended during the war, was restored. By 1900, however, the rail line had been extended only to Bluemont, and it never crossed the Blue Ridge. The railroad never went into the Shenandoah Valley. By the 1870 census, the population had dropped to below 1,200. It rebounded by the 1880 census. So this photo is the freight station. It's now Fireworks Pizza as part of Market Station. Oh, no, I'm sorry. This is the passenger station. The freight station is now Fireworks Pizza. So this is the 1878 Gray's new map of Leesburg. All of the blue shaded are public facilities, churches, the courthouse. I'm not sure why the NE Church cell isn't shaded blue, but it should be. But you can see how much the town had grown at this point. So this is now Mount Zion Community Center or Community Cemetery. This is still showing the Methodist Church, which is no longer there. The parsonage, which still is. The Episcopal Church, of course, is now here. But the cemetery, the Episcopal Cemetery, is still over on Church Street. And there are two African-American churches shown here, Providence Baptist and Mount Zion. What?
Did they move the Episcopal Church?
They built a new one.
Okay, so it's not the same one.
No.
Okay.
No, that building's been demolished. They built a new one. Right. So in 1872, Carlheim, a large Victorian mansion, was built for Pennsylvania industrialist Charles Paxton and his wife, Rachel. So this is a rare example of Victorian Italianate architecture in Leesburg. So the Paxtons had one child who died young. And when Rachel died in 1921, she created a trust. She left the house to a trust and her estate. And it was a convalescent home for children. And of course, as medical advances lessened the need for convalescent homes, it became an orphanage and then a daycare center. Most recently, this property, and it's about 14 acres, and there are a number of other buildings that have been built on there that were built when it was an orphanage. So the Ark of Loudoun was operating there. They left last year, are now at the National Conference Center. I'm not sure what's happening with the property now, but the house is in really bad shape. Apparently, so it used to be used for the Shocktober haunted house, and then the fire marshal was like, can't do that. So since then, nothing really has been done. I understand, I don't know if this is true, but my understanding is that during a hard freeze that the pipes burst and that they haven't repaired them. And so there's no water service to it and there's been damage. So we're still hopeful that something will happen to enable the trust to restore the building. In 1880, first telephone was installed here in Leesburg. In 1887, I'm not sure why that's doing that. There we go. The town council engaged the Norris Brothers, a local construction firm, to build this building known as the Leesburg Opera House. It cost $15,000. It contained the town offices as well as retail shops and a 450-seat theater on the second floor. This building was demolished in 1956. White's department store was built on that site, and that site now is the home of Senor Ramon's Taqueria, and then the other businesses located next to it. In 1891, electricity was installed in town, but the first electric line only ran from West Market to Cornwall. So, and obviously this picture was taken after that because you can see the electric pole there in the photo. And then the third and present courthouse was completed in 1895, also by the Norris Brothers. The Norris Brothers are largely responsible for a lot of the look and feel of downtown Leesburg today. They built the People's National Bank, which is now Lightfoot Restaurant. They built the existing Episcopal Church, which is also a Richardsonian Romanesque building. They built many of the larger Victorian homes in the historic district. So they are quite responsible for how Leesburg looks today. In the early 20th century, so Leesburg did remain the center of commerce for Loudoun County, which was largely agricultural, remained a market town. Westmoreland Davis, who was the wet candidate, meaning he opposed prohibition, was elected governor of Virginia in 1917. So Westmoreland Davis grew up in Richmond, Virginia. His family lost their fortune during the Civil War. He went to VMI on a scholarship, but then attended Columbia Law School, where he gained a law degree, and then moved to New York City, where he practiced law, and he became quite wealthy. And in 1903, he and his wife Marguerite purchased Morven Park, which is the plantation just north of Leesburg. And despite having no experience whatsoever, he took up farming. He became a gentleman farmer. He's also the founder of the Loudoun Hunt and served as the master of foxhounds for the hunt for many years. But in 1912, he purchased Southern Planter, which was an agricultural journal. And through that journal, which he published until his death in 1942, he advocated for modern farming techniques, for reforms using scientific methods to increase productivity. So he was elected governor of Virginia in 1917, despite actually despising the Democratic machine. He was a Democratic candidate, but he was not part of the Democratic machine that really ran politics in Virginia at the time. But as governor, he oversaw the creation of the state highway system, as well as other modernizations and reforms in state government. Leesburg Hospital opened its building on Cornwall Street in 1918. This was not the first hospital. Actually, there have been a number of hospitals. The building on Market Street next to the entrance to the town hall parking garage. I'm not sure what's there now. There used to be a hobby shop in there. I think it's now like a CBD shop. That was a hospital during the Civil War. Leesburg Hospital was organized and was first located in what is now an assisted living facility on Market Street. It's Horizon, I think it's Horizons. Anyway, but in 1918, they actually built a purpose-built hospital. This building, of course, is gone. It's been demolished. Unfortunately, the technological requirements of modern healthcare make the adaptive reuse of buildings for healthcare very difficult. And so this was demolished, I don't know, about 10 years ago to make way for an expansion of the hospital on Cornwall Street, the Inova Loudoun Hospital on Cornwall Street. So almost 600 Loudoners served during World War I. And in July 1919, Leesburg hosted a homecoming parade for the veterans. And in 1922, the World War I memorial on the Loudoun County Courthouse grounds was installed. And this is a picture of the crowd at the dedication of that memorial. So a lot of people were there. Between the wars. So 1922, Balch Library opened. It opened, the first library in Leesburg opened in 1907. It was located in the former Methodist parsonage at the corner of Wirt and Cornwall. But then this building was built, and at the time it was a private subscription library, of course, open only to whites. It became a free public library in 1960, and it was desegregated in 1965. It became part of the Loudoun County Public Library System when that was created in 1974. After Russ Library was built in 1992 by Ida Lee, this was closed. The Loudoun County closed this as a public library, and they transferred the building to the town 2 years later. And in 2000, the Thomas Balch Library reopened as the local history and genealogy library that we have today. So, in 1925, Leesburg High School was constructed. Of course, this building does still exist. After the public schools were consolidated in Loudoun County in 1954, this building became Leesburg Elementary. And then it later served as the school's administrative offices until they built their building down in Ashburn. So today, this is one of the county's senior centers. It also houses the backup emergency operations center. And I think the library administrative offices are there as well. 1927, Leesburg Fire Company built a new station on Loudon Street. This building still exists. This is the Patterson House here. This is the old Opera House that is gone. Tally Ho Movie Theater opened in 1931. Of course, it still exists. So probably the most famous person to ever live in Leesburg is General George C. Marshall. So Marshall was the U.S. Army Chief of Staff from July of 1939 through World War II until he retired in November of 1945. In the spring of 1941, he and his wife, Catherine, purchased the house known as Dodonna Manor. And in fact, George didn't even see the house before they bought it. Catherine bought it. He had just told him about it. He hadn't even seen it. But they moved here and sorry, I don't know why this is, there we go. So they moved here and he lived here until his death in 1959. Following World War II, Marshall served as Special Envoy to China, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. And in 1953, he received the Nobel Peace Prize for the post-war European Economic Recovery Plan that bore his name, the Marshall Plan. Now, most Americans today, particularly younger Americans today, don't know the Marshall Plan. But if you go to Europe, particularly the Netherlands, Germany, France, people today still reference the Marshall Plan. I was in Germany and the Netherlands last month, and during walking tours that I took in various places, the guides talked about, and the guys were younger than I am, talked about the Marshall Plan. So it's still a big deal for Europeans. I'm sorry, this is messing up. In 1956, Marshall spoke. This is a picture of him speaking at the dedication ceremony for the World War II and Korean War Memorial on the Loudoun County Courthouse lawn. So Marshall, as I mentioned, lived at Dodonna Manor until his death in 1959. Following his death, his wife moved to North Carolina, and she gave the house to her daughter from her previous marriage. The Marshalls didn't have any children of their own, Molly Wynn. And Mrs. Wynn sold the house in 1995 to the George C. Marshall International Center. They spent 10 years renovating the house and opened it as in 2005 as the historic house museum that it is today. So civil rights. So Leesburg, in my opinion, has an amazing civil rights history. So let's first talk about education. So in the late 1860s, so after the Civil War, the first public school for African Americans in Leesburg opened in this building on Liberty Street. There had been previous schools for African Americans, but they were privately run. This was the first public school. In 1884, the Leesburg Training School on Union Street opened, right? And this building has recently been under conservatorship, is now being managed by the Loudon Freedom Center. And they're working to turn it into a public space again. This is a picture of teachers and students at the school. In 1930, the school building was expanded to include high school classes. So if you looked at that building, there was the main building, there was sort of an extension on it. That was the expansion. But it was never an accredited high school. And in fact, Black families largely sent their children to high school in Washington, D.C., because there was no accredited high school for African Americans here in Loudoun County. And a group of African American parents continually approached the school board about building an accredited high school for African Americans. They were always told, oh, there's no land, there's no land, there's no land. And so they raised $4,000, and they purchased land, and they sold it to the school board for $1. And the school board continued to drag their feet. Oh, there's no money for building, until they were threatened with legal action. And they finally borrowed $30,000 from the state literary fund. And in 1941, Douglas High School opened up. So in 1954, the Loudoun County Public Schools were consolidated. Prior to that, Leesburg had schools, and Lovettsville had schools, and Waterford had schools, right? But they were all consolidated into a county school system in 1954. In 1958, Frederick Douglass Elementary School was opened as a segregated elementary school. This building no longer exists. It was demolished to build the current Frederick Douglass Elementary School. So it was on that site. And the training school at that point was closed and became a storage facility. And then in 1968, Loudoun County Public Schools were fully desegregated. After desegregation in 1968, the Douglass School became a middle school, and then it served as the alternative high school for many years. Monroe Tech was the vocational technical high school. It was relocated to the academies of Loudoun in 2018. And a new building was constructed on that site, the North Star School, which opened in 2018. And the alternative high school was then moved there. So that's where the alternative high school is today. And after that, so after the alternative high school moved out of this in the fall of 21, Loudoun County Public Schools has undertaken an amazing restoration of this building. And they did, in my opinion, just a fabulous job of outreach to the community, particularly to people who attended that school, as to what they wanted to see happen with the property. I mean, it's still used as an educational facility. If you have not been there, I highly encourage that you go. There is interpretive signage around the building, on the outside of the building, but you can also go inside to the main. When you first go in, it's what was the gym and the auditorium, and there are displays in there and more interpretive signage. It's well worth a visit. No, it was just training school, as in, it was more training for jobs, as opposed to just education for the purpose.
Douglas Community Center?
Yep, that is what it is. So on the legal side, Leesburg civil rights history actually begins long before the modern civil rights era. So in 1847, so still during the era of slavery, Leesburg attorney John Janney defended a man named Nelson Talbot Gant. He was a free Black man who was accused of stealing his enslaved wife after having offered to purchase her freedom and been denied. Janney successfully argued that his wife, that Gant's wife, could not be forced to testify against him, because husbands and wives can't be forced to testify against each other, right? And he was successful in that. And what that means is that that was the first time that the marriage of an enslaved person was legally recognized in the United States. So it was really a landmark case. But in the modern civil rights era, in 1933, Charles Houston was the dean of Howard University's law school and the first general counsel of the NAACP. And he was engaged to defend a man named George Crawford. So this is a picture. Charles Houston is the man in the center. So George Crawford, a Black man, was accused of murdering a Middleburg socialite and her maid, both white women. And Houston led the first all-Black legal team in the South in a major case. One of the men who was at that time, one of the men on his legal team who was a student at Howard University at the time, served as a researcher for the legal team. That man was Thurgood Marshall. And he later stated that, that the Crawford case had a major impact on his decision to focus his legal career on civil rights. So the Crawford case, given the overwhelming evidence of Crawford's guilt, Houston focused on saving his life, on saving him from the death penalty, which he was successful in doing. Crawford was sentenced to life in prison rather than sentenced to death. And so that was seen as a major step forward for a Black man in the South accused of killing or convicted of killing two white women by an all-white jury to not receive the death penalty, but instead to receive life in prison. More importantly, as a part of this trial, Houston successfully exposed the systemic exclusion of qualified Black citizens from jury pools. And that laid the groundwork for the US Supreme Court case a few years later, ruling that biased jury selection was unconstitutional. Several years after the Crawford case, Houston helped a group of African-American parents in Clark County in their efforts to build a modern high school. Already talked about that with the Douglas School, but it was Houston who was involved in that case. Sadly, Houston did not live to see school segregation declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in 1954. He died of a heart attack in 1950. And either last year or the year before, Loudoun County renamed the courthouse, the Loudoun County Courthouse, the Charles Houston Courthouse, in his honor. In 1961, Leesburg lunch counters were opened to African Americans. Middleburg was the first in Loudoun County to open their lunch counters to African Americans, to desegregate them, probably due to the fact that a very famous couple was traveling out from Washington frequently to Middleburg, and they didn't want to be embarrassed by this. And of course, that was President Kennedy, President Kennedy. And so, and then the Tally Ho, a couple of years later, both the Tally Ho movie theater and the Village Lanes bowling alley integrated with a little fanfare, led mostly by African-American teenagers, just deciding, I'm going to go to the movies, I'm going to go play, go bowling. In 1965, however, the Leesburg Fire Company closed their swimming pool rather than integrate it. They filled it with rocks, they paved it over, and closed it. This is a picture of what it used to look like. This is the fire station that still exists on Loudoun Street, and where the pool and fireman's field was is now all townhomes. Balch Library, I already mentioned this. Balch Library was integrated in 1965. In 1967, John Tolbert became the first African-American town council member. He was initially appointed, but then when that term to which he was appointed ended, he was reelected. And then in 1992, the I Have a Dream Committee organized Loudoun's annual Martin Luther King Day March. They start at the courthouse and they march down King Street to the Douglas School on Martin Luther King Day every year. Sometimes it's really, really cold. So Leesburg is unique and extremely lucky to have its own executive airport. So in 1918, it's the genesis. In 1918, a World War I plane landed on George Wallace's farm just outside Leesburg. He was a barnstormer, given rides, $1 a ride. But by 1930, Georges Field had become a privately run airstrip. This is a 1940s USGS map, and you can see here the landing strip is noted. So this is Lone Block neighborhood, right? Just to orient you. So this is essentially where Leesburg Plaza is, or Leesburg Plaza backs up to that property. And in 1950, radio personality Arthur Godfrey purchased Georges Field, and he gave it to the town on the condition that it continued to be used as an airport. Godfrey lived at Beacon Hill. I mean, it's now a big, housing development, but he lived there, and he flew his own plane back and forth between Leesburg and New York City for his weekly radio show. And so his purchase of this airport and then turning it over to the town so that they could take care of it was really for his own convenience, right? So by 1961, development had been encroaching upon the airport. And so Leesburg applied for a grant from the Federal Aviation Administration to build a new airport south of town. And Godfrey allowed the town to sell Georges Field as long as it used the funds for the new airport. And this is a photo from the groundbreaking at the new airport. For those of you who have been in Leesburg a while, this is Frank Ruffalo, and this is Stanley Collins in that photo, both of whom, of course, have passed. And the new airport, the new Godfrey Field, was dedicated in October 1964, but the airport was renamed the Leesburg Executive Airport at Godfrey Field in 2000. This is a somewhat dated photo. It's about, 5 years old now, that one of our pilots took on approach to the airport. Of course, there's a lot of construction over here and on this side. And there's been more construction at the airport, new hangars, et cetera. So today, Leesburg Executive Airport is the second busiest general aviation airport in the Commonwealth, behind Manassas. Although Manassas is about to not be a general aviation airport anymore because they're going to have scheduled airline traffic, and that makes them a commercial airport, not a general aviation airport. So woohoo, we're going to be the busiest general aviation airport in the Commonwealth. We have over 8,000 takeoffs and landings each month. And we're in the process, I don't work for the town anymore. The town is in the process of building a air traffic control tower at the airport. So, but that is a very long process to do that. Post-war, things that happened in Leesburg after World War II. So in 1949, Colonial Leesburg Incorporated was established. This was a private nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and protecting the historic downtown. They're the ones responsible for the brick sidewalks. In 1958, an additional 1,700 acres was annexed. So this is the 1962 map of the town. So at this point, you can see that Kentucky Circle had started to be built. Later, I can go here and go all the way up there. Growth of the town. In 1959, Leesburg adopted its first zoning ordinance. Dulles Airport opened in 1962, a major driver of Leesburg's expansion. Remember, I mentioned that until 1950, the town was about 1,700 people. After Dulles Airport opened, that really spurred the growth of the town. The Olden Historic District was established in 1963. This is a zoning overlay that protects the appearance, the aesthetics of the Olden Historic District. So this is a map. The outline is the current town boundaries. The green dotted line is the original Nicholas Minor town, and then the shaded area is what is the Olden Historic District. And so this is a larger look at that, at what all is encompassed in the Olden Historic District. This is the Rock Creek Farm property that the town just acquired as a park. The WNOD Railroad ceased operations in 1968. Of course, it was turned into the WNOD Trail. The first section opened in 1974. The last section opened in 1988. This runs from Alexandria to Percival, right through the middle of Leesburg. Later, 20th century changes. Market Street station redevelopment began in 1984. This was a community development block grant project aimed at blight removal or blight abatement. This area of town was it wasn't really heavy industry, but it was the industrial area of town, so mostly feedlots and other less savory types of development there. An additional 4,800 acres was annexed, more than doubling the size of Leesburg. So this map shows all of the annexations, all the boundary line adjustments of the town. So the gold here is the original, and then this was the 1950s. This was the 1984, and then these parcels surrounding. So this was boundary line adjustment for Heritage High School. This was for Smarts Mill and Tuscarora High School. This is Veterans Park that the town purchased. And then this is the Compass Creek area that was added to the town last year. In 1986, we received a donation of 138 acres from the Rust family to create Ida Lee Park. That also led to the creation of our Parks and Rec department. This is quite a dated photograph because it doesn't include the outdoor pool in it. The new town hall was built in 1990. The Dulles Greenway opened in 1995. Again, a huge driver of growth for the town of Leesburg, making it easier for people to live here and work in DC. County Administration Building, built in 1995. And in 1998, the Outlet Mall opened. At its peak, it attracted about 5 million visitors to Leesburg every year. I'm not sure since COVID and since how we shop has changed, if that how their numbers are doing today. So since 2000, we've opened 3 elementary schools, 1 middle school, 2 high schools, plus the North Star School. Over 6,000 new housing units, 2 million square feet of retail space, 1 million square feet of office space, 1 million square feet of other commercial space, 1.8 million square feet of data centers at Compass Creek. And the 400 acres of Compass Creek that were added. So today, we are the largest town in Virginia. If you don't know, there's a big distinction between being a city and a town. So there are a lot of cities that are smaller than we are, but we're the largest town in Virginia. The census still says that we're 49,000, but we're probably over 50,000 at this point. And back in 2022, Fortune magazine rated Leesburg 8th out of the top 25 best places to live for families in the US. So
I think we were second state. I read recently.
yeah. I need to update that. Thank you.
It's the state.
Right. Yeah. So I invite you to learn more about the history of Leesburg. So the town has a walking tour app. You do not have to download the app. You can actually use the tour in the browser on your phone. If you go to leesburgva.gov/walking tours. But these are the tours that are on there now. The Balch Library put together the Lafayette tour for the 200th anniversary of Lafayette's farewell tour. But there's these other tours. The Union Cemetery tour was actually put together as an Eagle Scout project by a young man, highlighting some of the more notable folks who are buried in Union Cemetery. And the War Memorials tour highlights the different war memorials, World War I, the World War II and Korean War, and then the Vietnam and the Afghan, Iraq wars that are on the courthouse grounds. So anyway, so please learn more. That is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Balch Library. It was always it was a private subscription, but how did the name Balch get attached?
Anna, do you know the answer to that? I mean, it was Mr. Bulge whose sons.
Yeah, so, Thomas Balch was a man who was actually born in Leesburg, and actually, at the time that Lafayette's farewell tour, he was a small boy and actually got to meet Lafayette. Anyways, he became, a lawyer and was known for, being the father of arbitration. He has since moved from Leesburg, but his adult sons came back to Leesburg wanting to commemorate him. And so they coordinated with the ladies who have the subscription library at the other place.
Right.
To basically stipulate that they would have a fund to promote the building of the library if they named it after Spalch. He also was really into genealogy and history and wrote a couple histories as well. So that really kind of makes it really great that we're now in history and library. Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
The diaries of the Civil War, are those accessible or copies of them?
They are.
Yes.
That's another question for Anna.
You can go upstairs to the reference staff, reference desk, and ask for those diaries, and our staff should be able to help accommodate you to see those.
Yes, ma'am.
There's property right next door that's been under renovation for what seems like forever. Is that included in the library?
No.
It's just every time I drive by it. It's gonna be happy.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So most of those buildings that we see in this photo, on that original stipulations of measurements and
No.
so how did they then just, I guess, design how it is?
So, well, so, I mean, minor required, you know, a small building. I mean, it was a fairly large building. So here's the Donaldson cabin right here, right? But they could build bigger, right? It wasn't just that, they had to build something at least that size. But then over time, of course, you know, people built other buildings. So. Other questions? Well, thank you very much for your attention.